Grade 12 Economics. Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Mhlongo, and I'm back here with you to present the lesson on economics. Remember that this lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery. Our today's lesson is the continuity of macroeconomics, and under macroeconomics, we have the new topic number 4, which is the foreign exchange market. So please join me. Let's not waste time and see what we have in the pocket for you. These are the lesson objectives that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. So after this lesson, you will have understood the following: a detailed discussion on demand and supply side policies or reasons for foreign trade or international trade. That's an essay. Remember, once your exam guideline says discuss in detail, that's an essay. We combine both demand and supply reasons, balance of payments, and each component. So you will learn more about the BOP or balance of payment that we've been talking about over the past weeks when we're teaching you. And then also correcting balance of payment disequilibrium. So you will also be able to correct BOP disequilibrium in case there is what we call the surplus or a deficit. We can intervene to correct it using some measures that are stipulated. It is believed that you already know the following information based on your grade 11 content. Number 1, you have done effects of globalization. You know what is meant by globalization and the effects or reasons for globalization. And then causes of globalization, you already know what is causing globalization. And then also you know the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. So, you know, when we begin our lesson, we always start with examination guidelines. So this is a very important document that guides you on how examiners will assess you during the examination. There is no way that they can march away from these guidelines. So topic number 4, the foreign exchange market. So this is the very important content that you need to ensure that you have it in your book pasted, so that when you study, you follow. You know what should be studied as a short question or as an essay. Okay, firstly, 4.1, main reason for international trade. We are here. So this is an essay. Remember, when it says discuss in detail reasons for international trade, we talk about both the demand reasons and the supply reasons. You must be able to discuss them in detail. So Lana, in this case, we answer questions to say, why are we demanding goods produced by other countries, and why are we supplying goods to other countries? And then you will also know to briefly discuss the effects of international trade. Then what are the effects, which include advantages and disadvantages? What is good about the foreign trade? What is bad about foreign trade? So as for exam guideline, demand reasons are important for you, supply reasons are also important, and then the effects of the foreign trade that include specialization, mass production, efficiency, and globalization. Then we continue. Then 4.2, balance of payments, the BOP. So in this situation, you will be able to really explain or answer some relevant questions based on the balance of payment. In this case, we have different sub-accounts of balance of payments, namely the current account, the capital transfer account, as well as the financial account. So these are the 3 sub-accounts that will be discussed in a brief, so that you will be able to answer relevant questions on the balance of payments. So it will appear on your lesson. And then also, you will be able, just for today, to briefly discuss the correction of the balance of payment disequilibrium. So whenever the BOP is on the disequilibrium, that simply means the inflow of the foreign currencies is not equal to the outflow of domestic currencies. So there is a sort of imbalance. So we call that a disequilibrium. So these are some measures that are used to correct BOP disequilibrium that will be discussed. And then for today, our lesson will be ending here. Then there will be assessment along the way. This part will be explained next week as a part of exam guideline, as we will continue to wrap up the chapter or the topic. These are the basic concepts that you can come across, and they are very important for you. Here you check on your Mind the Gap study guide. So these terms or concepts are found in there. So it is important for you to know them for the sake of your section A, including section B and section C where necessary. So we have absolute advantage, where we say it's where one country can produce goods or service cheaper than other countries. So you'll find that two countries are producing vehicles. So if these two countries are producing these vehicles, one country can produce maybe 50 items with the given budget, which is equal, and then one country can produce maybe 5,000 items. So that means the country that is producing more, given same resources, is having an absolute advantage. Balance of payment, we call this one a systematic record of all transactions between one country and another countries, e.g. Between South Africa and all other countries in the world. So if we talk of BOP, remember we focus on the transactions that are systematically recorded as for the inflow of the currency and the outflow of the currency. So when we receive different currencies from different countries in the world that we are trading with, including the currency, our currency that is leaving the country, going to different countries where it pays for different transactions. Comparative advantage, a situation where one country has a relative advantage in the production of a good or a service. Direct investment include transactions relating to investment, e.g. investment in business. So in this case, we refer to a situation whereby the business will be investing maybe domestically or abroad by starting, individual will be investing locally and abroad, or abroad by starting the business, or maybe buying existing business. We call that one a direct investment. Exchange rate. So in this case, we refer to the rate at which one currency is exchanged to another. So this is a value, it's a value of one country's currency in relation to another country's currency. We call that exchange rate. Then terminology continues. Free trade. So when consumers and producers are free to buy goods and services anywhere in the world without any restrictions. So that's when we can simply buy goods or import goods and export goods without any tariffs or restrictions imposed on that. IMF, International Monetary Fund. So it's an international organization that lends money to countries with ongoing balance of payment problems. So if ever countries are faced by BOP problems, those countries should be member countries of IMF. They will be given money in terms of the loans so that they will be able to correct that BOP problem. International trade, the exchange of goods and services across international borders. Whenever countries are exchanging goods with one another, we call that international trade. Net balance, money that enters the country is offset against the money that leaves the country. So we call this one the net balance. We compare the money flowing in and the money flowing out. That gives us the net balance. And then we continue. Portfolio investment. So this is all about buying and selling of equities and debt securities. So the sale of shares or government bonds is a part of portfolio investment. Special drawing rights, or SDR. So it's a financing instrument distributed among member countries of the IMF. SDR is given by IMF to its members for any financing issue that they are on. So it's offered only to member countries of what we call of IMF. Then we continue terms of trade. So it compares the index of export prices to the index of import prices. So this is the formula. It will be discussed on the next lesson. Trade balance is the value of exports minus imports. That's a trade balance. We call it also a balance of trade, where we compare the value of exported goods and services to the value of imported goods and services. Then transfer payment. So this is the money received without any counter performance or service rendered. Whenever the money has been transferred, that means no one has ever done any service to receive that money, but there is no counter performance or service offered in there. We call that the transfer payment. Example of that can be the gift that is given to the country. It will be discussed. So this is the lesson body. Reasons for foreign trade. It's an essay, section C, where we say discuss in detail reasons for international trade. Can either be demand reasons or supply reasons, or they can be claimed together to be discussed. Then also we'll talk about balance of payments, where we compare the inflow and the outflow of the currency. Correcting balance of payment disequilibrium will also be discussed. Then there will also be an assessment along the way here. And then this is an international trade. So what is meant by this? So this is trade, the foreign trade. We also call it this one the foreign trade. So it is the exchange of goods and services between countries. So whenever South Africa is selling its goods to the foreign country and the other foreign countries are also selling goods to South Africa, we call that an international trade. Also, it includes having to invest abroad and having them investing in South Africa. That's also an international trade. Countries exchange goods and services to reduce scarcity and supply constraints each country faces due to limited resources. We know that why do we have this foreign trade is because countries are faced by an issue of scarcity. Resources are not available equally across the world. So whenever the country is faced by the scarcity of a particular resource, it should be able to obtain or to get those particular goods and services from those countries that are having more, so that there will be reduction of scarcity of goods and services. And international trade is promoted by the World Trade Organization, WTO, to relax trade restriction between countries. So WTO or World Trade Organization functions to reduce restrictions that are imposed by countries through international trade to ensure that there is a better globalization. The international trade has a huge impact on the exchange rate, balance of payments, and terms of trade of the country. So this will be discussed further on the next week lesson, because that's where we'll talk about what we call the exchange rate as well as terms of trade. But to be clear on the balance of payment, it also has an impact, because that's when we compare the inflow of foreign currencies as well as the outflow of domestic currency to the different world countries. So that also has an impact, because should South Africa has less inflow of foreign currencies to the country than having domestic currency flowing out being more, that will lead to the deficit in the balance of payment, because our money will be flowing out more than the money that we receive, which will be bad for the economy. But should the country have more inflow of foreign currencies than the outflow of domestic currency, that will be good for us, because that simply means we are very much competitive in the global market. So there are so much transactions that we bill abroad, which means we receive more money from abroad, which increase our economy. So here we have an essay structure. I'm doing this because we have the first thing that appears is a demand and supply reasons for the foreign trade as an assessment. So remember, in your essay, you have an introduction, which is 2 marks. What is important in there? You must define the main concept so that we'll get that 2 marks. So do not include any part of the question in your introduction, meaning as you introduce, do not take the question statement and use it as an introduction. You won't get any mark in there. Just define the relevant concept. If ever the question says discuss in detail reasons for international trade, that means you have to define international trade. So that's why you have to define. Do not repeat any question statement in there. And then do not repeat any part of the introduction in the body. So there must be no repetition. And then avoid mentioning in the introduction what we are going to discuss. For instance, saying in this essay I'm going to discuss. Do not do that. It is not allowed. We continue with the structure. That's a body now of an essay. That's when now you have to discuss in detail the depth discussion. So it is very important for you to know that this were the 26 marks, the main part, and then under the main part you have the maximum of 8 marks for subheadings. That's why your essay must be arranged in subheadings. For subheadings you have 8 marks, and then also you have 3 marks for what we call examples. So the lower order can be 8 marks maximally. In this case, I'm talking about your subheadings for your essay, including examples. That worth 8 marks. This is the 8 marks I'm talking about. It includes both subheadings and examples. So should your subheadings be more than 8, you will only be marked out of 8, including examples. No examples will be marked in your essay separately, because we have exhausted the lower order responses and mark allocated to it. And then also we talk about what we call it the additional part, which is 10 marks. In this case, you will be given the different question where you have to answer in the higher order. So we have the maximum of 2 marks for mere listing of facts or examples. If you list facts or examples in here, you get only 2 marks. So that means it is important for you to discuss in detail and then ensure that you answer in a higher order responses to obtain your maximum of 10 marks in the additional part. And then we go to the conclusion, which is simply the higher order response. So a higher order response or conclusion should be a brief summary of what has been discussed. So do not simply explain to say in this essay I have discussed this and that. Try to be authentic as you answer in your conclusion. Try to be critical so that you will be able to obtain 2 marks. Try to bring your recommendation or criticize wherever there should be a criticism in the way in which things are done in that particular topic related to South Africa. So you need to be critical as you answer, which will be giving you maximum of 2 marks, and then you will be getting your 40 marks in your essay. So let's go further and see what is being assessed, because this is the section C, discussing detailed reasons for the international trade. So I believe you have covered this one, because according to the ATP, this has been covered. So let's check. Then additional part, why do South African businesses fail to grow in international market? That is your 10 marks. So the first thing should be your introduction. So as for introduction, we define international trade. International trade is the exchange of goods and services between world countries. So whenever goods are exchanged between world countries, that is called international trade. That gives you 2 marks. Any other correct and relevant response will be rewarded 2 marks here if it's correct. And then demand reasons for the foreign trade. Here we go. We have the population size, income levels, change in wealth of the population, preference and taste, as well as difference in consumption patterns. So these are subheadings that are the part of the demand reason. So what do we do to remember easily here? For population size, income levels, wealth of the population, preference and taste, as well as consumption patterns, we say people in Witbank prefer coffee. So let's check. What do we mean by that? P stands for population size, I stand for income level, W stand for wealth of the population, P stand for preference and taste, C stand for consumption pattern. So that's how you can always remember these subheadings for the better writing of an essay. So let's check the discussion. Population size. So the population size of a country determines the quantity of goods and services needed. So we know that if it depends on the population. If ever have less population, that means it will require less demand, less goods and services. So if there's more population, there must be more goods and services produced in the country by domestic markets in order to meet people's needs. And then the increase in population size causes the increase in demand for goods and services. I think that one is clear. As the population increases, what is going to happen? The demand for goods and services will also be increasing because people are willing to satisfy their needs and wants. There is no way that we have more population and less demand. Once we have more population as a country, that means the local market must also be geared up to ensure that it increases its productive capacity in order to meet the demand for domestic consumers. Should our local firms or local market be unable to meet the demand for local consumers or domestic consumers, then consumers will then be importing goods from other world countries. To meet local demand, local market should increase its productive capacity. Yes, it is important. There is no way that we meet local demand without increasing the productive capacity. Local suppliers might not be able to meet the local demand as population size increases if they have supply constraints. So should our local firms or local market be unable to increase the productive capacity, that will mean now local consumers will have to import goods from other countries. So we say the population size is increasing, and then there's more demand for goods and services, and then there must be more supply. Should there be the aggregate supply remaining constant, not increasing or decreasing because of supply constraints, then the level of imports will be increasing. We have import tendency. So imports will be increasing by domestic consumers so that they can be able to satisfy their needs and wants. So we simply demand goods from other countries because of the increase in population. We know that the population, as it increases, it determines the quantity of goods demanded by domestic consumers. Then that pushes our firms or local market to be able to produce more goods and services for the domestic market. Should they fail to produce goods for domestic consumers, that will mean local consumers then will be pushed to demand goods from abroad so that they can be able to meet their needs and wants. This calls for local consumers to demand imports in order to satisfy their needs and wants. And then income level. We know that whenever the level of income increases, let's say the income per capita increases in the country, it's obvious that the disposable income for the population will be increasing. So, and then the change in income level of the population affect the demand. We know that as the income changes, the demand for goods will be changing also. So if income is increasing, there will be more demand for goods in the domestic market. If income decreases, there will be less demand for goods and services in the domestic market. So as an income per capita increases, results to the more disposable income that can be spent on goods and services, some of which may then be produced or be imported. So as our income per capita goes up or increasing, that will lead to the increase in the disposable income. So if the disposable income increases, then consumers will then be tempted to demand more goods and services. And some of those goods they demand will be produced abroad, meaning they will be imported. We know that when the income level changes, people are always tempted to spend. So they spend in both domestically produced goods and services and also imports. So in developing countries, there is a high demand for basic goods and services, but a lower demand for luxury goods. So they might have to import food. We know that developing countries or underdeveloped countries mainly import basic food stuff for living so that they can satisfy their needs and wants, because local markets maybe are unable to produce those demanded basic goods and services. But we know that in developed countries, there's a high demand for luxury goods and services. So in that case, people from developed countries might be using their income to import luxury goods that are not produced in their countries. So in developed nations, the demand for luxury is high and they spend most of their income on expensive imports. So should they want to buy some goods that are not available in their own domestic economy, they will be importing those goods from other countries, as expensive as they are, because their income level is high. Then the change in wealth of the population. So as the wealth of the population increases, that simply means that there will always be high demand for goods and services, because we know that the wealth is simply convertible to income. And then when households have access to credit facility, their consumption pattern will change and empower them to purchase more expensive luxury goods. So whenever people are having access to credit, we know that they normally spend on buying more goods and services. So they even spend on luxury goods, like they buy houses, they buy cars. So it happens that some of those goods they buy are produced abroad. They are not available in the domestic market. So when luxury goods cannot be produced locally, they are demanded from other countries. So because of the increase in wealth, or people are having more wealth, they will then be demanding those luxury goods from abroad because they are unable to produce them in the local economy. Most of luxury goods are produced by developed countries, as they specialize in these markets. So we know that as developing countries, if people there are having more wealth or they are more wealthier, what happens? They will be importing luxury goods from developed countries, because in developing countries we don't have the market mostly for luxury goods. Mostly they are produced from abroad. This calls for developing countries to import, since they are incapable of producing luxury goods. But be aware of the fact that it happens that even basic goods and services are imported from other countries, because maybe the country is unable to produce them, especially if ever that is affected by climate condition. So it will be imported from other countries, even if it's a basic goods or services. Preferences and taste. So remember, people will have different preferences and tastes. So preferences and tastes differ from a person to person and even a country to country. Lifestyle is different. It's not the same from a person to person. People prefer different things for their own basic lifestyle. So we know that our modern consumers are exposed to a variety of platforms that allow them to have different tastes and preferences. We talk about social media. It is there. The media is there to expose us to different things that are available across the world, which allows us even to purchase goods online from different countries. So we prefer things that are not mainly available in South Africa, or that are not mainly produced in South Africa. So that results to the creation of the market in the foreign countries, so that those consumers from other countries can be catered for. For instance, check South Africa. The Apple iPhone is not produced in South Africa, but it's from USA. What happens? Most of South Africans prefer that kind of the phone. So in that situation, there's been a creation of the market for Apple iPhones in South Africa, so that consumers can meet their needs and wants. So in that case, these preferences that are different from country to country, from person to person, result to the creation of international markets across different countries, so that those consumers can be able to meet their needs and wants. Not all goods wanted are produced locally. Therefore, some of them must be imported. That's because of the lifestyle. People prefer different things with their money. So they cannot be restricted to demand only locally produced goods and services, because they want to improve their standards of living. Countries trade with other countries because they have demand for goods that they are unable to produce. So this foreign trade exists because countries cannot produce everything. So one can produce something, one can also produce something. So what do? They simply share these goods with one another, so that they will be able to meet their needs and wants. So like South Africa, it cannot be able to produce some of the goods. So what does it do? It exports its goods to foreign countries to get money to pay for the imported goods that they are unable to produce. The global brand popularity results in the creation of markets internationally to accommodate consumer preferences. We know that there has been a global brand popularity. You find that the brand is very much popular across the world, which means that attract consumers to demand those brands being based in different countries. So that will lead to the creation of that particular market for those goods internationally, allowing consumers to be able to satisfy their needs and wants. The simple example, I'm talking about the iPhone. So the iPhone iPhone is not produced in South Africa, but because of brand popularity, we are familiar with it. So what normally happens for local consumers in South Africa to be able to have this iPhone, what should be done? That means American company for iPhone have to create the market for iPhones across the world or even in South Africa, so that domestic consumers can be able to meet their preference and taste through that particular brand or product. For example, Apple iPhones are produced in USA, but there is high demand for them in South Africa. This has caused the increase in their imports, since they are highly preferred by local consumers. So we simply demand goods from other countries because of taste and preferences. The difference in consumption patterns. Now we move to consumption patterns. We know that consumption patterns differ from a country to country. Basically, they are informed by the the economic development of the country. We know that developed countries normally prefer to buy luxury goods. So whenever they import luxury goods, while underdeveloped countries normally prefer basic goods and services. So they happen to mostly to import the basic goods and services for survival. Underdeveloped nations have a high demand for basic goods and services, but lower demand for luxury goods and services. These increase the demand for imported necessities and decrease the demand for luxuries. So underdeveloped countries do not demand most of luxuries, but they demand the necessities for the basic living. So they import those necessities if they cannot be offered adequate by their domestic markets. So they import them from other world countries. So we know that they are unable to demand most of luxuries because they are underdeveloped. There's a lower level of wealth and level of income. So in this case, we simply compare the pattern or the consumption pattern for both developed nations and developing nations. Developed nations demand less of necessities and most of luxuries because they want to keep up with their living standards. So in that case, as they want to import goods, they import luxuries than importing the necessities. Well-developed nations have high demand for luxury imports as they strengthen their standards of living. So this creates a larger market for imported luxuries if they cannot be produced locally. So those luxury goods, if they are not available in those developed nations, they will then be imported from other countries so that they will be able to meet their needs and wants. So under consumption pattern, we simply talk about how countries, what is the pattern of both the developed and developing nations in terms of consuming goods and services. What are they consuming? Are they consuming basic goods in developed countries, or they consume luxury goods? Then we check developing nations. What are they consuming? Is it luxuries or basic goods and services? We compare that. So be aware that whenever you answer these kinds of questions, know the key points to discuss in here. For instance, population size, you check what should you discuss the most. You check that as number of people increases, then there will be more demand for goods and services. That simply means the change in population size determines the quantity of goods needed within the economy. So in case the local market is unable to meet the need for those goods and services, what is going to happen? Consumers will then be importing those goods from foreign countries so that they can be able to meet their needs and wants. And then you talk about the wealth. We know that changes in wealth will always affect the demand for goods and services. As the wealth of the population increases, that means there will be an increase in the demand for goods and services, especially luxury goods. So as luxury goods are demanded, it can happen that those luxury goods are not produced in the local economy. They then should be imported for consumers to meet their needs and wants. And then we know that as people are having access to credit facility, they tend to demand more goods and services so that they can improve their living standards. So that simply means they can even import goods and services. We talk about level of income. Be aware that in there we talk about as the income per capita goes up or increases, that will also increase disposable income, which increase the demand for goods and services. So it can happen that as the demand for goods increases, the local market is faced by some supply challenges. Therefore, consumers, for them to meet their needs and wants or satisfy their needs and wants, they need to import those goods from other countries in case the local market is unable to produce those goods and services adequately within the domestic economy. Then we talk about the preference and taste. Then in that situation we refer or we compare people differ in terms of taste and preferences. Others will demand a certain particular range of goods. Others will demand a certain particular. So what is causing that? That is caused by the media platforms that are available to expose consumers from different countries to different brands across the world. In this case, we talk about brand popularity to say, as the brand is popular across the world, consumers across the world might be demanding those goods and services which are not produced in their domestic economy. So that will be leading to the creation of that particular market globally so that consumers can be satisfied across the world. And then supply reasons, we continue. So we have natural resources, climate condition, labor expertise or labor resources, technical or technological development, specialization, and the capital. So here we say to remember, rich countries like to send chocolate. So these R stand for natural resources, C stand for climate condition, L stand for labor resources, T stand for technical development, S stand for specialization, and then C stand for the capital. So let's check the supply reasons for foreign trade. Here we are answering the question, why are we supplying other world countries with some goods and services? So the first thing is natural resources. You must be aware that natural resources are unevenly or unequally, or they are not equally distributed across the world. Some countries are having more of a particular natural resource and less of the particular natural resource. Remember, they are provided naturally. If you don't have it, you can't get it artificially, you can't create it, it is not available. Therefore, you should be supplied by those countries that are having more, that are having the surplus extraction of that particular natural resource. Like South Africa is very much wealthy in terms of minerals, but check USA does not have much of minerals. So it depends on South Africa to supply it with minerals. So in that case, that simply means as we have extraction or surplus extraction of natural resources, we have to supply the local market and supply the global market also. Check South Africa does not have oil as a natural resource. So what do we do then? We are the importers of oil from different world countries so that we can satisfy our needs. So they supply us with oil, and then we sell them we supply them with what? With the minerals such as the gold, the platinum, etc. Some countries have more of natural resources than other countries because of their geographical areas. So, and nothing can be done for them to access that particular natural resource they don't have. They need to be supplied by those that are having the surplus extraction. They have excess supply for natural resources for which some countries have excess demand. So if we say they have excess supply, we mean they have more of that particular natural resource, and then others are having excess demand, meaning they don't have a resource. So they have excess demand, that they need more of that particular natural resource. What happens? That creates international trade. Now that what I don't have, you supply me. What you don't have, I supply you. So that creates international trade as we exchange now. In order to reduce scarcity, favored countries get a surplus extraction, collection, and cultivation of resources and supply to foreign markets. Meaning they extract or cultivate or and reap more of that particular product. After that, they supply their local market. The surplus will be supplied globally so that they help those countries that are having less of that particular natural resource or nothing. South Africa is rich in minerals but does not have oil. It then exports minerals to earn the exchange, which may be used to pay for oil imports. The climate condition, you know that climate condition differs from a country to country, and climate condition has a huge impact on agricultural sector. So climate condition make it possible for some countries to produce certain goods at the lower prices than other countries. So climate variations, drought, floods affect agricultural production. We know if ever the country is not favored to produce a particular product, there is no way it can have the harvest. So it will depend on other countries to supply it. And other countries are favored to produce a particular crop. So they produce the surplus and supply even other countries in the world that are unable to produce or cultivate that particular crop. Good climate conditions are essential for agricultural production. And then we go further to check. Climate variations favor some crops cultivation, which result to surplus production and the global supply. So those that are favored will have the supply production of that particular crop and supply the rest of the world that is unable to grow that crop because of their bad weather condition or unfavorable weather condition. Different climate condition allows some countries to grow certain crops. We know that it allows really some countries to grow and not grow some crops also. This means that other countries have no choice but to import products that their climate condition is not suited for. So in that case, they will be supplied by other countries while they are also supplying them with something else that they are able to produce, but those other countries are unable to produce. It also talks to the same thing that we discussed above, the excess supply and excess demand. Countries that are not suited for to produce a particular crop are having the excess demand, but the one that are suited for to produce a particular crop are having excess supply. So they produce and extract more of that particular crop and supply the rest of the world, while others will be depending on being supplied for because they have excess demand. Certain crops only grow under certain conditions, so can only be grown in the countries where climate condition is suitable. Where it's not suitable, there is no way the crop can grow. So if that country is in need of that particular crop, it should be supplied because it has an excess demand. Technical development or technical resources. So in this case, remember, countries differ in terms of technology, but we know that most developed countries are very much favored in terms of technology, and it allows them to produce more goods and services at the lower cost per unit. So countries with more technology, like developed countries, are very much favored to produce more goods and services, which allow them to have the surplus production, and then they have excess supply. Then they supply the rest of the world to those countries that are not having enough technology. Some countries are technically more advanced than others and can produce new and improved products at the lower cost than other countries. Countries that are more technically advanced than others have advantage over other countries that still use outdated technology. So what is the impact of this? It allows them to produce those particular goods and services at the higher quantity and at the lower cost, which then give them what we call an excess supply or the surplus, which will be supplied into the global market. Production processes and the availability of equipment and machinery influence the supply of goods and services and increase the global supply. If the country is having well improved technology, that country will have an advantage of producing more goods and services than other countries at the lower cost, which will then be an advantage also for them to supply the rest of the world, because they will be having a surplus production, which is known as excess supply. Those that are not having much of developed technology, they will always be dependent because they have excess demand for those particular products, which will then they will be supplied by those with what you call excess supply or surplus production. Labor resources. So here we know that labor differ in quality, quantity, and the cost between countries. So in developed countries, their labor is well trained. Those are called experts, because here we talk about labor expertise. So those people are well trained. Also, they produce the quality, and also as they produce more quantity and the quality at the shorter period of time, using less resources, they are very much efficient. There is no wastage of resources because those people are well trained to be efficient. So in that case, and in developed countries, those people in there, the labor is well trained and it's in the good quality, and it produces more goods at the shorter period of time, and also the good quality at the same time, spending less resources. That gives them an advantage to have the surplus production, which allows them to supply the global market with those goods and services. Some countries have highly skilled and well-paid workers with high levels of productivity. We know that those developed countries pay their workers very well as a motivation or motive for them to produce good quality and at the right quantity, so that they will always have the surplus goods available, which is known to be an excess supply. Some countries have more skilled workers, such as engineers, who can manufacture sophisticated equipment and machinery better and cheaper than other countries. So it gives them an advantage now, because they get the cost advantage and time advantage, quality advantage and quantity advantage, because those people are well trained and well skilled to get the job done at the shorter period of time, at the lower cost, and at the good quality and at the good quantity, which gives them what we call an economies of scale, because those goods they are produced in large quantities at the shorter period of time, at the lower cost, at the high quality and at the high quantity. That gives them economies of scale, while other countries are having an issue of poor, less skilled labor, in a way that they produce less goods and services, spending more time, spending more resources at the poor quality, at less quantity, which creates what we call these economies of scale. productivity levels are higher and their production costs are lower. So mostly those countries that are having well-skilled labor that can produce sophisticated machines and equipment at the shorter period of time using less amount of money or cost. They have a cost advantage, quality and quantity advantage. Those ones are the ones that always produce goods at the lower cost, at the higher quality. So they have that advantage. So the more skilled, educated, and productive the workforce can be, the more competitive the country can be in the global market. The country becomes more competitive across the world if ever its labor is well educated and skilled, and then it's very much productive, it's well paid. So that country becomes more competitive because their labor is at the higher level compared to other through the labor or workforce for other countries. That allows them to produce more goods and supply the global market because they have excess supply while others are having excess demand. The specialization. So in this situation, we talk about the fact that some other countries simply decide to produce specific goods and services where they are good. They ignore the rest of the quantity or the rest of brand that they can be able to produce. They choose the one where they have what we call an absolute advantage. So if you have an absolute advantage, that means you can produce a particular product at the higher quantity and then at the good quality, also spending less resources than other countries. Then in that case, you have an absolute advantage. That creates what we call the specialization. They choose to focus on that particular product than others because they have a cost, quantity, and quality advantage in that particular product. Like we talk about Japan. Japan has an advantage on producing vehicles because it has invested mostly on automotive technology. So they have chosen to specialize on producing vehicles because of technology. Specialization in the production of certain goods and services allows some countries to produce them at the lower cost than other countries. Countries choose products that are profitable enough for them to optimally allocate their resources in order to specialize. Specialization results in mass production, which brings surplus to be supplied to the countries with fewer resources to produce the product. This results in large-scale production, lower production cost per unit, and good quality. So if ever the country is specializing, it's simply single out a particular product where it's very much good on producing, where it has a cost advantage than other countries, quantity and quality advantage. The labor is well trained. In that case, they can simply be able to produce that particular product more than any other country. So that country will be the main supplier of that particular product in the global market. And then the capital. Capital allows developed countries to enjoy advantage over underdeveloped countries. We know that developed countries are having most of technical machines and equipment that are used to transform natural resources to final goods and services. So due to lack of capital, some countries cannot produce all goods they need. So they should be supplied by those that are having high level of capital. Some countries need to modernize their industries and economies with advanced machinery, equipment, and factories, but cannot obtain this equipment because they lack financial capital to do so. Like South Africa is lacking some of the basic machines to transform their natural resources to final goods and services. Therefore, it should then sell its natural resources to other countries abroad, and then it should be supplied with those goods as finished goods from our natural resources, which should be at the higher cost then. So that's an issue with the lack of capital. This has increased the need for the foreign trade, giving more platform to developed countries. We know that developed countries with the machinery, they take our natural resources and transform them to finished goods, and we sell these natural resources to them at the lower cost because they are still unprocessed. As they come back to us as finished goods, they become highly expensive because they've been transformed to final goods and services. So that's an advantage developed countries always hold on against developing countries. The capital or financial advantage, it allows them to really manipulate developing nations across the world. Additional part. Why do South African businesses fail to grow in international markets? Let's check. The country is a main exporter of raw material which have low monetary value compared to finished goods. We know that mostly we have natural resources that are sold abroad, and they're sold at the lower cost because they mainly have strategic value. They are not having much value if they have not been transformed and value added. So in that case, we sell them at the lower cost and bring them back at the higher cost. So our local firms then find it difficult to be competitive because they simply sell the natural resources instead of selling the final good that have been transformed. South Africa's manufacturing sector has supply constraints or supply challenges, meaning they have less capacity to produce since they lack capital to buy, they lack machinery or financial capital so that they can finance their production of goods and services. High cost of production creates unfair competition for local industries in foreign markets. So we produce at the higher cost because we are not highly subsidized as local firms. Also, we have the high cost of production because our cost of infrastructure is too high. Cost of admin is also too high. So that results to local firms finding it difficult to be competitive in global market because they produce at the higher cost. They must also sell at the higher cost. Worst part, then inflation also becomes an issue. Less government intervention with production and export subsidies make it hard for local business to compete heavily with the subsidized businesses. If our firms are not highly subsidized and foreign firms that we compete with are highly subsidized, that simply creates unfair competition for us. So we'll never grow easily because we lack subsidies and financial support from the state or the government so that we become even more productive and compete effectively in the global market. We continue. And then infant industries or infant South African industries find it hard to compete with multinational industries from abroad. Remember, our local firms, most of them are infant industries, meaning they lack the capacity to produce and they produce at the higher cost. They are faced by an issue of these economies of scale. They produce less goods and services at the higher cost per unit and sell them at the higher cost. So having to compete with the multinational industries that are highly subsidized, that are having advantage of cost, which is economies of scale, we cannot compete easy with those businesses because they are big enough, they are large enough to drive us out of the market since we produce and compete with the same product across the world. Tariffs are too heavy for small industries which are not subsidized. So local firms find it very difficult to cope with tariffs imposed on their exported goods and services by global countries. So that will be driving them out of the market. Internal exposure requires huge capital. So for us to be well exposed abroad, there should be high level of capital so that our goods can be well advertised in the foreign platforms. So without having that capital, local firms cannot be able to advertise themselves or expose themselves or their goods and services or their brands in the global market. So that requires the state intervention to support our local business so that they can be highly competitive. Other countries have competitive advantage in production. So South Africa fails to compete on the international market with the said countries. So any other relevant correct response is accepted for 10 marks. Remember, in this part, which is the additional part, only 2 marks will be allocated for the listing of facts. Even if you list 5 facts, you'll be given 2 marks if they are correct, and then also for listing of examples. So here you must answer like I've discussed here in full sentences with the pure sense so that you can obtain 10 marks. Then conclusion, remember we said it must be the higher order response. International trade remains the main mechanism to reduce scarcity of resources, goods and services of goods and services across the world. It, however, lacks element of fairness since developing countries find it difficult to compete in the global market. Remember, your conclusion should include your main part and the conclusion or one of them so that it will be effective. It is not the must that to combine them both, but this conclusion that I've just provided here, it includes both the main part as well as additional part. Then you have your effective conclusion. Look, I did not repeat anything that have been mentioned above, but I simply indicated that it's a good mechanism to reduce scarcity. However, it creates the fairness between countries because as developing countries, we find it difficult to compete effectively with developed nations because we lack funds, we lack subsidies, because we compete with multinational industries that are very much big enough to drive us out of the market because they have the cost advantage. That gives you what you call at the 40 marks. Then we go further to absolute and comparative advantage. So what is meant by an absolute advantage? Remember, you should be able to distinguish between absolute and the comparative advantage as you are given the question maybe for 8 marks. Also, you should be able to use the table to give the difference between the two. Also, you must be able to give some examples of an absolute or comparative advantage. So absolute advantage occurs when a country can produce a good or a service efficiently than other countries while using same number of resources. So the example can be, we have South Africa, maybe we have also maybe Nigeria. Maybe we are all producing the wine. So South Africa and Nigeria are given 50,000 to produce the wine. So how many tons can be produced by South Africa? Maybe South Africa will produce maybe 100,000 tons, but Nigeria can only produce maybe 50,000 tons. Can you see that South Africa is having an absolute advantage because giving a similar amount of money to produce, we are producing more than Nigeria. In that case, we have an absolute advantage. Absolute advantage results to specialization. So if the country is faced by advantage that we call absolute advantage, it can specialize by focusing on this particular product for which it has a cost advantage and quantity advantage over other countries. And then we continue. Look at the table below. So there's a table below that it's indicating something. We have the product of the wine in tons as well as the coffee. So South Africa and Brazil. South Africa can produce 100 tons of the wine, and then Brazil can produce 0. But what happened? South Africa can produce 0 tons of a coffee, and then Brazil can produce 100 tons. So in this situation, you will say South Africa is having what? Absolute advantage on the wine production, and then Brazil is having absolute advantage on the coffee production. So what is going to happen then? South Africa will produce 0 of what we call a coffee, and then 100 tons of a wine, and sell to Brazil. South Africa will then export what we call the wine to Brazil, and the Brazil will export what we call the coffee to South Africa. So they exchange in this situation. This creates also an international trade, because what you cannot produce, you can sell to other countries. So what you can produce more of, you can sell to other countries. What you cannot produce, they can produce and sell it to you. Then in that case, we get what we call an absolute advantage going on in this table. So let's check. South Africa produces more of a wine than a coffee, whereas Brazil produces more of a coffee than a wine. South Africa has an absolute advantage on a wine production, while Brazil has an absolute advantage on the coffee production. Then what is going to happen? South Africa will export 100 tons of wine and import 100 tons of coffee, while Brazil will export 100 tons of a coffee and import 100 tons of a wine from South Africa. That creates an international trade. Comparative advantage. It occurs when an opportunity cost of producing a product is lower than the other country's opportunity cost. So comparative advantage is also referred to a relative advantage. An opportunity cost refers to the value of an alternative that is sacrificed or traded off. To obtain an opportunity cost, the quantity of both products produced by a country is divided. See the table below again. So this can be explained well with the table. So check. Sugar in tons and the corn in tons. South Africa and Malawi. South Africa is producing 10 tons of what we call of sugar, and then 80 tons of what we call of a corn. And then Malawi 5 tons of sugar as well as 75 tons of a wine. So South Africa produces more sugar and corn compared to Malawi. The cost of producing both goods between South Africa and Malawi must be compared. The cost of producing sugar to corn for South Africa is 1:8, which is 8/10. This indicates that South Africa has to sacrifice 80 tons of corn to produce 10 tons of sugar. In Malawi, opportunity cost of sugar is 1:15, 75/5. This means that Malawi has to sacrifice 75 tons of sugar to produce 5 tons of the corn. So we continue. It is therefore cost effective for South Africa to produce sugar compared to Malawi. Because of that, South Africa has a competitive advantage on the production of sugar, while Malawi has a competitive advantage on the production of the corn. So these are the numbers. So here it will be easy for you if you use the table to explain this. Then we move to the effect of the foreign trade, so which include the likes of specialization. If ever we're under foreign trade, countries get an opportunity to specialize because the local market, the global market is always bigger than what we call the global market is bigger than local markets. So whenever your goods are highly demanded abroad by different countries, you will then specialize because you get an opportunity to supply the rest of the world. Mass production, with the fact that we are exposed to foreign trade, we can be producing goods at the large quantities, which allows us to produce then in mass production efficiency. In this situation, if firms are exposed internationally, they are able to use their factors of production efficiently. All of them will be utilized because the demand is locally and abroad. Globalization. This simply happens because as we trade with other countries, there will be removal of some restrictions that will be prohibiting functionality of firms across the world. That's when now WTO or World Trade Organization intervene to reduce trade barriers between countries, allowing them to trade with goods effectively without some restrictions. That will be causing what we call a globalization. That's when countries end up forming together some trade blocs so that they will trade effectively with one another by removing some trade restrictions. So specialization. Specialization creates a platform for countries to produce and export to other countries. So we have discussed specialization before to say it happens when the country has an advantage to produce the particular product at the lower cost and at the higher quantity than any other country in the world. Countries import what they cannot produce, which increases the variety of goods and services. So depending on elasticity of demand for goods and services, countries specialize on. Countries that produce goods with an inelastic demand like oil have a vast amount of export revenue, so they earn more money in terms of exported oil. The mass production refers to the production in large quantities. So mass production promotes economies of scale, which occurs when large quantities are produced at the lower cost per unit and they are also sold at the lower cost. Mass production increases the supply and the country's competitiveness or competitive edge on the global market. If the country produces in mass production, it has a competitive edge over other countries that are producing the same product across the world. Mass production, economies of scale, and specialization create huge internal advantage as they improve product supply and competitiveness. So if ever involved in foreign trade, then we have that advantage on the cost. We will produce in mass production because we have to supply the local firms as well as the global markets so that they can satisfy their needs and wants. So in that case, will have an advantage of economies of scale and also of being very much competitive because of the mass production. Efficiency. The foreign trade improve competition and ensure that consumers have access to a variety of goods and services at the lower cost. Remember, the globalization or the foreign trade allows for countries to sell goods at the lower cost because of global competition. So that will be improving efficiency. Higher competition results in consumers affording more goods and services at the lower cost with the same income. So consumers are always the beneficiaries if ever there is what we call a high level of competition across the world. Competition results to efficient use of resources. Like firms find themselves having to optimize their resources or factors of production, then they will be able to produce goods at the lower cost. Then globalization. The foreign trade is the backbone of globalization. We cannot have globalization without having to trade with one another. The trade liberalization have influenced positively the growth of foreign trade. So this is when we remove some trade barriers amongst countries, which allows globalization to occur. Remember, globalization refers to the interaction between world countries with the trade as a goal. That's when you remove some trade barriers between countries to make the world a single society. We call that the globalization. So the foreign trade potentially stimulates economic growth because foreign markets are bigger than local markets. So if the country is fully involved in the foreign trade, it can experience high level of economic growth because its goods and services are demanded locally and in the global markets, for which we have different world countries that are demanding our goods or services. So if we are exposed internationally, our goods can be demanded by more than 100 countries in the world, which will be an advantage to us to have high level of economic growth. Then, having done with that, we move to the balance of payment, which is the last section of our lesson, the balance of payment. So this one is a very simple topic that we can cover, but it is very important that you pay your attention so that you can understand how this thing or how is it done. What is the importance of BOP? In the balance of payment, we simply compare the inflows and the outflows of currencies. We check as South Africans the currencies that are inflowing to the South African economy and the outflow of our currency to the global market. Should we have more inflow of foreign currencies than the outflow of domestic currency, then that means we have a good economy because we receive more income, we have more national income. But if we have less inflow of foreign currencies as more and more inflow of domestic currency, that means we have a problem because we are not very much competitive in the global market. So the balance of payment, we call this one a systematically book of records that capture all countries' international transactions. Whenever we are engaged in any transaction internationally, that is captured on the balance of payment. Simply means as we have our goods exported abroad, then we receive money as a payment for our goods and services. That money should be added in South African economy as the payment for export. If ever one of our companies is investing abroad, they are starting the company abroad, or they are buying shares abroad, that means the money must be subtracted because our currency is flowing out of the country. And then if ever the foreign business is investing in South Africa, either as an FDI or they are buying shares in South African economy, that money should be added in South African economy under BOP because the money is flowing in. We are receiving it. So that currency is flowing in. It must be added. So that's what we do. If ever maybe there are some deposits that are made by South Africa to the foreign countries, or some donations, or maybe there's a transfer of capital. Maybe a South African person is moving from South Africa to the foreign country with his or her own capital. That money must be subtracted from us because the money is going out. Our currency is flowing out. And then if ever the foreign person is moving his or her capital to South Africa financially, that money must be added in our economy because that's an inflow of the currency. That's a balance of payment. We check the outflow of our domestic currency and the inflow of foreign currencies to South African economy. In case the inflow of currencies is more than the outflow of our domestic currency, we have the balance. We have the surplus on the balance of payment. The surplus means our inflows are more than our outflows. So in case we have more outflow of our domestic currency than the inflow of foreign currencies, we have a deficit because that means our money goes out more than the money that we receive as a country. In case we have maybe the equity in there, our outflows are equal to the inflows, we have the balance of payment equilibrium. If you can get it from that beginning, you will be fine. So that means our BOP can be favorable and can also not be favorable. It will be favorable if ever we have more inflows than outflows. It will be unfavorable if we have more outflows than the inflows of foreign currencies into South African economy. That is the summary of the balance of payment. Should you get that one correct, you will easily subtract what is necessary to be subtracted and add what should be added. That will be giving you your BOP. Then we continue. Transaction reflecting inflow of money into economy are added. So if ever any transaction indicate the inflow, it will be added. And then any transaction that indicate the outflow of the domestic currency should be subtracted because the money is going out. So take it normal. Even if you are not doing accounting, you know that what you pay out must be subtracted. What you receive must be added. So negative and positive signs are very important for you to get your accurate figures on the balance of payment. The balance of payment is used to measure the level of the country's economic performance and competency. So we use BOP or balance of payment to measure how competitive is the country in the global market. So that will be, BOP will be giving us the clear picture as an indicator if we are doing well or bad competitively abroad. Favorable balance of payment. So favorable balance of payment indicate the surplus if inflows are compared to outflows. So as we have a surplus, that means it indicates that inflow of the money in a form of foreign currencies exceed the outflow of the money in terms of the domestic currency. So we have a surplus if we have more money flowing in than the money going out of the country. And then this might be a result of more exports, more foreign direct investments, more transfer capital from other countries, more income received for services, and more inward portfolio investors. And then favorable balance of payment result to a stronger exchange rate or currency exchange rate or the currency and internal competitiveness of the country's cooperation. Our business become more competitive abroad because of what we call favorable balance of payment. It's only favorable if ever we have a surplus. Remember, surplus is obtained when the what we call the inflow of foreign currencies exceed the outflow of our domestic currency. Unfavorable balance of payment. So it occurs when we have a deficit. So what is meant by a deficit? Deficit indicates that the outflow of money in a form of domestic currency is more than the inflow of money in terms of the foreign currencies. That's what gives us a deficit. It's a deficit if ever, then our currency flows out more than what we receive. You'll find that maybe 500 billion goes out, but we only receive 1 billion in terms of foreign currencies. That gives us a clear deficit in terms of the balance of payments. This might be a result of less exports than imports, less foreign direct investment into the country, less net capital transfer from other countries, less income received for services, and less portfolio investments. So this will simply lead to us faced by the deficit on the BOP. The balance of payment deficit weakens the currency of the country and result to economic instability because our currency become relatively weak compared to other currencies. So our exchange rate will be weaker, and that will lead to us finding it difficult to compete in the global market because of the weak currency. Should the currency be weak, our local consumers cannot be able to import goods cheaply. It will be expensive. Local firms will find it difficult to do what? To get machines or equipment from the global market because our currency is weak. Also, if South Africa is owing the international organizations such as IMF and the World Bank, even other countries, it will be very expensive for them to pay back interest because our currency is relatively weak. We have to pay more to afford a single dollar or a single pound. We continue with BOP. These are BOP sub-accounts. So number one, we have the current account. Number two, capital transfer account. Number three, the financial account. So they will be discussed here for you to have a clear picture. The current account, what is meant by current account? What does it capture? Current account is the balance of payment sub-account that captures transaction based on income and expenditure, production, services, and transfers. So these are mainly components that are captured on our current account. It's mainly about transaction based on income and expenditure, services, the transfers, as well as the production. So all of these are captured by current account, but we will subdivide current account into two. In that case, we'll talk about the physical or tangible components of the current account and intangible components of the current account. So current account may reflect surplus of inflows. If inflows exceed outflows of the the foreign exchange. So deficit is reflected if outflows of local currency exceed the inflow of the domestic exchange or currencies. This, the current account equilibrium is achieved when the inflow is equal to the outflow of the currencies. So as the inflow of foreign currency is equal to the inflow, the outflow of domestic currency, we say we have the current account, equilibrium. Current account has two categories, namely physical or tangible goods and goods, as well as invisible or intangible imports and exports. Current account components. So here we go. We have physical imports and exports. And then we have also intangible imports and exports. Then we have the balance on the current account. So under physical imports and exports, we talk about tangible goods that are exported by South Africa and that are imported by other countries to South Africa. So in this case, we talk about merchandise export. What is this? We talk about the movement of physical goods and services from one country to another. So merchandise exports here, we talk about goods that are produced by South Africa and sold abroad. These exclude the gold. And then we talk about the net gold export, which is the difference between the gold exported and the gold imported. So South African net gold is always positive because South Africa is the main exporter of the gold. Merchandise imports, here we talk about the stock of goods that have been produced abroad and sold in South Africa. These exclude the gold. And then the difference between imports and exports is called the trade balance. So the trade balance is a difference between physical imports and physical exports. Then we go to the second part. Income receipts. This is the income received by South Africa as a payment for maybe factors of production that have been sold abroad. Service receipts is also positive. We talk about the services that have been rendered by South African companies in the global market. So they've been sold. We talk about banking services, accommodation services, transport services. That money comes into the country, must be added. And then income payments. This is the income that should be subtracted because South Africa is paying this income maybe on the borrowed factors of production from the global market. And then payment for services. We talk about services that are borrowed by South Africa from the global market. So those services must be paid for by South Africa. It is subtracted. And the net current transfer, they are always positive. In this case, we talk about the money that is received from the rest of the world compared to the money that is paid to the rest of the world as a part of maybe donation or gifts. That money then is a part of net transfers or current transfers. The positive balance of payment or the balance on current account is referred to be a surplus, but the negative one is referred to be a deficit. That is the display or outlook of what we call the current account. Then let's check the components. They will be discussed. Now, merchandise export, like I've said before, it is more about movable physical goods or tangible goods that are traded between countries. It involves merchandise exports and merchandise imports. And then it also called visible export and visible import because custom officials can physically check these items and count them. And it is normally weighed when going through the customs. And then it includes the raw material, fruit and vegetables, minerals, excluding gold. So gold is not included in this one. Then we continue with other components on the current account. And then let's check. We have net gold export. This one, we talk about gold as a commodity. So as for net gold, we refer to the amount of gold exported and compared to the amount of gold imported, which gives us the net gold export. So it shows the difference between the amount of gold exported and the amount of gold that has been imported. And then South Africa is the net exporter of the gold, and it's therefore positive. So the amount of gold for us, net gold, is always positive because we are the next net exporters. So the gold is indicated separate in the current account because of its historical importance. Remember, the gold used to determine the value of the currency for each country. The country with more gold used to have the strong currency, and the country with weaker gold used to have the weaker currency. For that reason, the gold is one of the important commodities in South Africa. And then also, check, why is South African currency called the rand? It is called the rand because the first gold in South Africa was discovered in Witwatersrand. So to honor the place where the gold was discovered, then our currency was called a rand. Until today, it is called a rand. So it was used to determine the value of the currency. A country with more monetized gold used to have what we call the strong currency. So to get the value of a physical export, this amount must be added to merchandise export so that we can get the what we call the trade balance or balance of trade. And then we continue on the current account services. So we are done with the physical, what we call tangible or physical exports and imports. In that case, we talk about merchandise export plus which is positive, plus net gold export. Exports are always added. You will minus merchandise imports because that's an inflow of goods produced from other countries. Why we subtract them? It's because we pay for them. Money will be flowing out of South African economy to pay for those imports. Services and income payments. So here we talk about intangible imports and exports. So in this case, this refers to the payment for service that has been rendered and receipts. So in this situation, whatever that has been paid or that has been rendered in other countries by South Africans will then be added because we receive those services. But whatever that we have received as services that we have they have been rendered by other countries to South Africa, they must be subtracted because we pay for them. Let's check. This also is also regarded as invisible imports and exports. Remember, services are invisible, so that's why we regard them as invisible imports and exports. It includes services such as transport, travel, construction services, financial services, professional and technical services, as well as personal services and government services. It also includes money spent by the tourist. Service receipts are the inflow into the domestic economy, while service payments are the outflow. Then we continue income payments and income receipts. We check the income earned by citizens of one country in another country, or income paid to the foreign citizens. So it includes compensation for employees, which include wages and salaries and benefits, investment income, interest, dividends, or profits, as well as rent. So this is the income earned by factors of production for South Africa abroad, or earned by foreign countries, factor of production in South Africa. It is a trade-off for factors of production between wealth countries, like I've just mentioned. Income receipts is an inflow into the domestic economy, while income payments is an outflow. So as we receive income for our factor of production, that income will be added because that's an inflow of foreign currencies. As we pay for foreign factors of production, that money is an outflow because we are paying for what we call our currency is going out as paying for the foreign services or foreign factors of production. Current transfers. So current transfers refer to the income that does not require any counter performance. That's an income that is transferred from one country to another, which include personal transaction in a form of gift, donation, social security contributions, and taxes imposed by foreign governments. Those are the part of what we call current transfers. So the net current transfer is a difference between the transfer received by the country and transfer paid out by the country. So our South African what we call net current transfer has been positive because we have been the most of recipients than paying out money as donations and gifts. South African current transfer is positive. They are added on the current account. Why is positive? Because we are the one that are the net, what we call it, we are the net recipients. We receive most of donation from the rest of the world currently. And then the trade balance or balance of trade is the difference between imported and exported physical goods. We call that the trade balance or the balance of trade. It excludes services, so there are no services because under trade balance we talk about imported and exported physical goods. Trade balance consists of merchandise export plus net gold export and then minus merchandise import. That gives you the trade balance. If the trade balance is positive, it will then be indicating that the exports are more than the imports. That is called the trade surplus. And then if trade balance is negative, that means imports exceed exports. That is known as the trade deficit. And then trade equilibrium exists when exports are equal to the import. That will be the trade equilibrium. So the balance on current account can either be negative or positive. So if the balance on current account is negative, that means the inflow of foreign currency is less than the outflow of domestic currency. There's more currency going out than currency is coming into the country. Then we call that what we call the current account deficit. And then the positive means the surplus, because that simply indicate that the inflow of foreign currency is more than the outflow of the domestic currency, meaning we are very much competitive in terms of what we call exchanging goods and services. And then we move to capital transfer account, so which talks to the grants, debt forgiveness, as well as liabilities by migrants. Then let's check. The capital transfer account captures grants relating to ownership of fixed assets. If ever one is owning a certain fixed asset and can be transferred to the foreign country, we call that the capital transfer. Debt forgiveness refers to the writing off a portion of one or more loans. If ever a South African is owing maybe a particular bank abroad, then the South African is failing to pay that particular debt for the given period of time, that debt will be written off. As it's written off by that particular country, it's regarded as a debt forgiveness. So it's a part of what we call the capital transfer. If it's written off, that means that particular person that was owing has been given that money free of charge without having to pay anything in that case, because has failed to pay as a part of the bad debt. So that money will be added in South Africa. But should the foreign person owe a South African bank and fail to pay it back in a way that he or she will become a bad debt, that will also be a debt forgiveness, meaning that money will be a gift to that foreign national. So in that case, that money will be subtracted from South African economy because it becomes more of a gift to that particular person. And then the value of household and personal belongings, financial claims and liabilities of immigrants are the part of the capital transfer account. For instance, South African immigrants to Brazil, immigrate to Brazil, the proceeds of the sale of his or her own assets will appear as an outflow. Check. If South African person is living from South Africa to Brazil, that person cannot take the car with him, cannot also take the house with him. As they sell their fixed assets, then they will be taking that money with themselves to Brazil. So that money will be subtracted from South African economy and be added in Brazilian economy because that money is going out. So if a Brazilian person comes to South Africa with his or her own belongings in terms of financial capital, that money will be transferred to South African economy and will be added in our South African BOP because the money is flowing in. So that's what we are talking about under capital transfer account. Remember, as the money goes out, it will be subtracted and be called what we call an asset, because any future gain of that capital will be enjoyed in South Africa. As the money comes in as a part of capital transfer, it will be added in South Africa and be called a liability, because any future benefit or gain will be enjoyed back in Brazil. So the Brazilian immigrant to South Africa, the proceeds of the sale of his or her own assets will appear as an inflow, so they will be added. We continue. The difference between inflows and outflows of capital is regarded as the net capital transfer. So we check net capital transfer can either be negative or positive. If it's positive, that means we have more inflow of capital transfer from other countries than ours that are going out. If it's negative, that means we have more inflows of capital transfer from South African economy to other economies in the world than those that we are receiving. So it will then be negative. So inflows of capital are added, is added as a liability. Why is a liability but added? It's added as a liability in BOP because any future benefit of this particular capital will be enjoyed back in the country of origin, not in South Africa. Outflows are subtracted as assets. Why as assets? Because any future benefit of these assets will be enjoyed back in South Africa. And then inflows are called liabilities because any future benefits of capital flow back to the country of the capital, like I've just mentioned. Outflows are called assets because their future benefits of capital flow back to South Africa and they will be enjoyed back in the country. That's why we call them assets, but we subtract them because money is going out. That's why the inflows are called we call them liabilities, but we add them because money is flowing into the country. The financial account. So the financial account referred to the BOP sub account that keep transaction based on any kind of the investment. So in this case, we talk about the direct investment, portfolio investment, and other investments. So let's go through and check. Financial account. The financial account is the account that captures transaction related to all types of investments. So any kind of the investment is recorded under financial account, not in the capital transfer, not in the current account. It's only under financial account. So it includes direct investment, portfolio investment, and other investment. They will be discussed. So the inflow of investment is credited while outflow investment is debited. So we credit the inflow because money flows in. We debit the outflow because money goes out of the country. So investment that do not form a category of either direct investment or portfolio investment are the part of residual. They are recorded as the other investments. So they are not the part of either direct or portfolio. So they will be explained. The part of direct, the part of portfolio will also be explained. Net financial derivatives refer to an investment made by a specific in a specific asset with the fixed future value that is payable on the specific date. We call those net financial derivative. A reserve asset is the financial capital held by monetary authorities of a country, such as SRB, to finance the trade disequilibrium. If the country will be facing the trade disequilibrium, it will be having a reserves asset that can be used to finance what we call the trade disequilibrium. So now we check the direct investment as a part of the component for financial accounts. Investment on foreign direct investment, we call this one an FDIs. Whenever the country investing by buying the company abroad or starting the company from the scratch abroad or investing on real estate abroad, we call that what we call the direct investment. Investors invest in with the purpose of being involved in daily operations of the company for at least 10% control. Whenever you invest directly, you will be the part and the parcel of the operation of that particular business. It's unlike when you invest under portfolio. So direct investment include investment in real estate, fixed property abroad. It also includes establishment of the company abroad or buying the company in the foreign country. When the foreign investor invests by buying the company in South Africa, the invested amount is credited and called a liability. Why we give it, we credit it? We credit it because that particular amount of money is flowing in. We say the foreign investor is buying in South Africa. So that money will be added in South African economy as an inflow of the foreign currency, but it's called a liability because any future benefit of this investment will be enjoyed back in the country of origin. If SA investor invests by buying or establishing the company abroad, the invested amount is debited and called an asset. So the amount of money must be debited, must be subtracted because the money is going out of the economy, but it's called an asset because any future benefit of this asset or of this investment will be enjoyed back in South Africa, because remember, any part of investment is accumulative. Then the difference between assets and liabilities are called or what we call a direct investment. So this includes loans, currency, and short-term trade credits and deposits. And then an important category here is a short-term trade credit, which is used to finance imports and exports. And then any investment that is not in the category of either portfolio investment or direct investment is captured in this category, which is other investments. Then we go to the correction of BOP disequilibrium. How can we correct BOP disequilibrium? We can use interest rate. The Reserve Bank can intervene by increasing interest rates so that local consumers can find it difficult to borrow money to pay for imports. Import controls, putting some restrictions like import duties and tariffs to prevent the inflow of foreign produced goods and services. Borrowing and lending. South Africa can borrow money from IMF so that it can be able to finance its own BOP disequilibrium, but this is known as a short-term solution. Changes in demand. We know that as the demand changes, it can lead to either more demand or less demand for goods and services from abroad. Export promotion can be a policy that supports the exportation of locally produced goods and services by funding local businesses with exports and incentives so that they can produce more goods for the global market. Import substitution. This refers to the putting some restrictions based on import that can restrict the importation of goods and services so that we can be able to reduce the level of imports. Changes in the exchange rate. We know that exchange rate can either be free floating, fixed, or it can also be controlled or managed floating exchange rate. And then let's check the interest rate. Interest rate has a great impact on the demand in the economy. We know that. And then the increase in interest rate decrease the demand for goods and services, which include the demand for imported goods and services. High interest rate attract foreign portfolio investors to invest in the country. And then this increases the inflow of the foreign currency into the economy. And then also when interest rates are reduced, the demand for the demand increases in the economy, including the demand for imported goods and services. Then foreign portfolio investors are discouraged to invest due to lower interest rates. This decreases the demand for local currency. And then exchange rate manipulation is widely used by monetary policy instrument to correct the BOP disequilibrium in the short term. and then import controls. So this is all about what we call having to take some measures as the government to reduce number of imported goods and services from other countries. The government uses import tariffs by imposing import taxes on imported goods and services to make them more expensive, thereby encouraging local consumers only to demand the locally produced goods and services. And then import quotas are also limited, that are set by the government on the quantity of goods that can be imported by foreign countries. They include general quotas as well as discriminatory quotas. So remember, as goods are limited to flow in, that will lead to consumers demanding less of those goods and services. South Africa has, however, complied with the trade liberalization by the World Trade Organization by reducing the trade barriers on imported goods and services. Borrowing and lending. Countries with balance of payment surpluses often lend money to countries with BOP deficit, but it's also known as a short-term solution. If countries have deficits on the BOP, they can choose either to borrow money from those with the surplus or borrow money from organizations like IMF so that they can finance their exports. Borrowing is not a long-term solution to solve the BOP disequilibrium. It's a short-term solution. Continuous borrowings widen the state debts, which will lead to the country to exhaust its own borrowings as it's trying to compile its budget. Like South Africa have exhausted its borrowing capacity in all organizations. So that's why it's difficult for the country to compile the proper budget. There is no much funds available because it cannot borrow even much because it has exhausted its borrowing percentage from different organizations. Changes in demand. Change in demand for either domestic goods or foreign goods will always affect the flow of money. The increase in demand for locally produced goods and services into the foreign markets increase the inflow of money. And then also this positively influence the current account of balance of payment because there will be more inflow from other countries in terms of foreign currencies. The increase in demand for imports into the local economy increase the outflow of money, which will lead to maybe more money flowing out of the country, which is bad for the BOP. This negatively affect the current account on the balance of payment because more money will be flowing out than the money coming into the country. It is therefore important that local demand is well managed by increasing or aggregate supply to avoid balance of payment disequilibrium, meaning local firms must supply more goods and services to prevent local consumers from demanding goods from abroad so that there won't be BOP deficit. Export promotion. So export promotion such as government incentive or subsidies is applied to encourage production of goods that can be exported to the global markets. Export promotion policy increase the volume of exports and increase the foreign earnings from the global markets. So this increased local production, real GDP and economic growth also result to the surplus in terms of trade balance because there will be more money flowing in than the money going out. Export promotion policy creates a good environment for local exporters to improve their international competitiveness into the global market. High level of export decrease the current account deficit because export might surpass imports, meaning they can be greater than the imports, which will be creating the trade surplus. Import substitution. Government put some import restrictions to prevent large volume of imported goods into the country because as goods are imported highly into the country, more money will be flowing out of the country. So should the state intervene by putting some restrictions here, like import tariffs and import quotas, that will lead to what? It will lead to less goods and services flowing in and less money going out to pay for imports. These restrictions include import tariffs, trade embargo, import quotas, etc. So these are some of the import restrictions, but they will highly be discussed under import substitution topic. The government gives incentive to local businesses to produce goods and services that were imported before so that there will be less volume of imports coming into the country. So import substitution encourages local firms to produce goods rather than consumers importing them. And then exchange rate. There are domestic regulations to allow central banks to ration foreign exchange. So earners of foreign exchange are compelled by law to hand over those currencies to the central bank. Those who require foreign exchange must apply from the central bank to obtain the foreign currencies. Exchange rates include free floating exchange rate, managed or controlled floating exchange rate, as well as the fixed exchange rate. So when the exchange rate appreciates, export become expensive, which decreases the demand for what we call our goods abroad and cause BOP deficit. But if ever the exchange rate depreciates, our exports will appear cheap and there will be more demand for our goods abroad. However, that can lead to the decrease in terms of trade. In case maybe we have our goods maybe are demand elastic also. As our goods are becoming cheaper, the TOTs will be decreasing because we'll be receiving less money as the payment for those exported goods and services. The currency depreciation or devaluation makes imports more expensive for domestic consumers and exports cheaper for foreign buyers. And then the depreciation of South African rand results to South African export becoming cheap in the foreign market increases the demand for exports, even though there will be lower income received since our goods will be less competitive abroad. This has an effect on increasing the volume of exports while increasing the export earnings. Trade deficit will be reduced. And then cheap export results to the increasing demand for South African exports abroad. If ever our exports are cheap, there will be more demand for our goods abroad, which will mean there will be more goods that are demanded into the foreign countries. Expensive import results to local consumers importing less of those goods and services that are produced abroad, which will result to maybe the trade surplus in our balance of payments. So this is the short assessment. I will be quick on this one. This is 1.3, where you do provide the concept index of export prices to the index of import prices, terms of trade, a trade in the value of country's currency in relation to another country currency. A decrease in the value of one country in relation to another country's currency, and then we call that a depreciation. The payment that requires no counter performance, that's a transfer. Production in large quantities, mass production. It is obtained when the country produces more of a certain product than other country given same resources. Absolute advantage. Financial instrument that is linked to the specific financial instrument or the commodity. So we have terms of trade, depreciation, current transfers or transfers, mass production, absolute advantage, and financial derivatives. Then let's check here. We are given what we call the BOP under current account, where you have merchandise exports, net gold export, services. So all balance of all current account components are provided here. Then you are given A. Be aware that once you are given A, there will be a question here, and then maybe there might be some calculation needed to be calculated. So which item in the current account is unique in South Africa? Then we have net gold export. It's very much unique because in this situation, we as South Africa as a country is not importing mostly what we call is not importing the gold, but it's the main exporter. So the net gold export is unique. Then name the missing label A from the current account in there. It was current transfers. And then briefly describe the term trade balance. The trade balance is the difference between exported physical goods and imported physical goods. And then we continue. Explain one factor that would influence the demand to reduce the deficit in the balance of payments. An increase in repo rate affect the interest rate and lead to decrease in import spending, meaning as repo rate decreases, we will demand less of imported goods because we have less money, we don't have access to credit. Government incentives are applied to substitute imports, and then import control tariffs and quotas reduce the demand. Also, certain exchange control have been retained by the central bank to ration the foreign exchange and lead to decrease in demand. Then we continue. Determine the value of trade balance, show all calculations. Merchandise export 1,175,547. They are positive, plus net gold export 71,678 is positive also, minus net gold imports it's negative 1,222,944. Then we get 24,281. So that's our net gold export. Then I, Mr. Mhlongo, thank you. I will meet you again next week, where we will be doing a revision as you prepare for your control test that will be written on the 14th of March. Also, we will be completing this part of the foreign exchange market that have not been completed, which include the exchange rate system, terms of trade. Exchange rate systems as well as terms of trade will be covered next week. Then we'll be doing a revision as we'll be preparing for our control test on the 14th of March 2025. I thank you. See you then. Bye-bye.